The gunshot that killed her father came through the kitchen window at dawn, and in diving to save him from the second bullet, Eleanor Preston's face met the iron skillet that had been heating on the stove for breakfast. She remembered the searing agony, the smell of her own flesh burning, her father's blood pooling on the wooden floor as she screamed, and then nothing but merciful darkness. That was 3 years ago in the spring of 1881, when Eleanor had been 20 years old and considered the prettiest girl in San Bernardino, California. Now, in the dusty heat of June 1884, she was 23 and no one had seen her face in all that time. The veil she wore was black lace, heavy enough to conceal but sheer enough that she could see through it, and it hung from the brim of a wide hat that she never removed in public. The burns had healed badly, leaving the right side of her face a twisted landscape of scars that pulled her mouth into a permanent half-grimace and sealed her right eye partially shut. She had looked in the mirror only once after the bandages came off, then smashed it with her fist and never looked again. Her father's killer had never been found. Sheriff Thomas had investigated for months, but the trail went cold. Her father, William Preston, had been a land surveyor with no known enemies, a quiet man who kept detailed records and spoke the truth even when it made people uncomfortable. Eleanor suspected that truth had gotten him killed, but she had no proof, only grief and rage and the constant throb of phantom pain across her ruined face. She lived alone now in the small house on the edge of town, the house where it had happened. Most people thought she should sell it, move away, start fresh somewhere no one knew her story. But Eleanor was stubborn, and this house held every memory of her father, every moment of happiness before that terrible morning. She made her living doing laundry and mending, work she could do with the curtains drawn, and once a week she ventured into town with her veil in place to buy supplies and endure the whispers. The women pitied her. The men looked away. Children sometimes stared until their mothers pulled them along with sharp reprimands. Eleanor had learned to move through the world like a ghost, present but not quite real, seen but not acknowledged. She told herself it did not hurt anymore, that she had grown accustomed to the isolation, but on nights when the wind howled down from the San Bernardino mountains, she wept into her pillow and wondered if she would die alone, unloved and unmissed. It was on one of her weekly trips to town that she first saw Owen Carver. She was standing in front of Peterson's general store, her basket of purchases weighing heavy on her arm, when a commotion erupted down the street. 3 horses thundered into town, their riders whooping and firing pistols into the air. Eleanor pressed herself against the store's wall, her heart hammering. Gunshots always brought back that morning, the crash of breaking glass, her father's surprised gasp. "Easy now," a voice said beside her, low and calm. "Just cowboys blowing off steam. They will not hurt anyone." She turned to find a man standing close, positioned between her and the riders as if to shield her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sagebrush after rain, and they met hers without flinching from the veil. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips, but his hands were relaxed, unthreatening. "I am not frightened," Eleanor said, though her voice shook slightly. "Just startled. Understandable. They are loud enough to wake the dead." He touched the brim of his hat. "Owen Carver, madam, new in town as of yesterday. Eleanor Preston." She hesitated, then added, "Welcome to San Bernardino." The riders had dismounted now and were heading into the saloon, laughing and jostling each other. Owen watched them go with an expression Eleanor could not quite read, something between amusement and disdain. "You are a cowboy yourself," she observed, noting the rope coiled on his saddle and the worn spurs on his boots. He corrected. Drove cattle up from Texas to Montana more times than I care to count. Got tired of eating dust and sleeping on rocks. Thought I would try my hand at something more stationary. He glanced at her basket. Can I carry that for you? Looks heavy. Eleanor's instinct was to refuse. She was accustomed to doing everything herself, to needing nothing from anyone. But the basket was heavy, and there was something about Owen Carver's steady presence that made her feel almost normal, almost like the girl she had been before. "Thank you," she said quietly, and let him take it. They walked together down the wooden sidewalk, past the land office and the bank and the dress shop whose windows Eleanor no longer looked into. Owen did not seem bothered by her silence, did not push for conversation or ask intrusive questions. When they reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scattered houses, he said, "I imagine it is around here somewhere, just ahead. The white house with the blue shutters." Her house looked shabby compared to the neat yards and painted fences of her neighbors. The garden her father had kept had gone to weeds, and one of the shutters hung crooked. Eleanor felt a flush of shame beneath her veil, though she told herself Owen Carver's opinion meant nothing to her. He set the basket on her porch and stepped back. "There you are, Miss Preston, safe and sound." "Thank you, Mr. Carver, that was kind of you. Just neighborly." He smiled, and it changed his whole face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "I reckon we will be seeing each other around town." Eleanor doubted it. She came to town as infrequently as possible, and men like Owen Carver, even reformed cowboys, had no reason to seek out veiled recluses. But she nodded politely and watched him walk back toward the main street, his stride easy and unhurried. That night, she lay in bed and thought about those gray-green eyes and the way he had looked at her as if the veil were not there, as if she were simply a woman he had helped with a heavy basket. It was a dangerous thing to think about. Hope had hurt her more than the burns in the long months after the accident, when she had still believed someone might love her despite her ruined face. She had learned better since then, but when she finally slept, she dreamed of sagebrush after rain. Owen Carver had come to San Bernardino with a purpose, though he had not shared it with Eleanor Preston. 6 months earlier, his older brother James had died in a mining accident outside of town, or so the telegram had claimed. Owen had not believed it. James was careful, experienced, not the kind of man to die from carelessness. So Owen had sold his share of a small ranch in Wyoming and traveled to California to find out the truth. What he had learned so far was troubling. James had been working for the Pacific Mining Company, surveying land in the foothills, when a tunnel collapsed and killed him instantly. At least, that was the official story. But the men Owen had talked to in saloons and bunkhouses told a different version. They said James had been asking questions about survey records, had believed someone was manipulating land claims, and had threatened to go to the authorities. A week later, he was dead. Owen knew grief and he knew anger, and right now anger was winning. He had taken a job as a guard for one of the freight companies to give himself a reason to stay in town while he investigated. But his real work happened in the evenings, talking to miners and clerks, and anyone else who might know something useful. It was 3 days after his encounter with Eleanor Preston, when Owen learned something that made his blood run cold. He was drinking coffee in a cheap boarding house dining room, listening to 2 surveyors argue about property lines, when one of them mentioned William Preston. "Poor bastard," the older surveyor said. "Shot through his own kitchen window for knowing too much." Owen set down his cup carefully. What did he know? The surveyors looked at him, suddenly wary. Who wants to know? Someone interested in justice. Owen kept his voice level. My brother was James Carver, died in a mining accident last December, starting to think it was not an accident. The older surveyor's expression shifted from wariness to sympathy. I remember your brother, good man, asked the right questions. He lowered his voice. Preston had proof that someone was filing false land claims, using surveys that did not match the actual terrain. He was going to take it to the federal land office. Got killed before he could. Who did it? If I knew that, friend, I would be dead too. All I know is Preston had a daughter. She was there when it happened. Got hurt trying to save him. Horrible thing. She still lives in his house doing laundry to get by. Poor girl probably has the documents he died for hidden somewhere and does not even know it. Owen's mind was racing. Eleanor Preston. The veiled woman with the quiet voice and the heavy basket. The daughter of a murdered surveyor. And if his brother had been asking the same questions William Preston had asked, then they had been killed by the same people. He found himself walking toward the edge of town without consciously deciding to go there. The white house with the blue shutters looked lonely in the fading light. Smoke rose from the chimney, and he could see a lamp glowing in one window. He stood at the gate for a long moment, debating with himself. She had already lost her father to this conspiracy. He had no right to drag her back into danger, but she deserved to know the truth. And if the documents existed, they were evidence that could bring the killers to justice. Owen opened the gate and walked up to the door. He knocked twice, firmly but not aggressively. There was a long pause, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened a crack and Eleanor's veiled face appeared in the gap. "Mr. Carver," she sounded surprised. "Is something wrong?" "I need to talk to you, Miss Preston. It is about your father." The door opened wider. He could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge. "Come in." Her house was small but clean, furnished simply with well-worn furniture that had been cared for. She gestured him to a chair at the kitchen table and remained standing, her arms wrapped around herself protectively. Owen noticed the old burn mark on the floor near the stove and understood with a sick feeling exactly how she had gotten her scars. "What about my father?" Eleanor's voice was tight. Owen told her everything. About James, about the false land claims, about the pattern of men who asked questions and then died. He watched her sink slowly into a chair, her veiled head bowed. "I suspected," she whispered. "He had been worried in the weeks before he died. He kept his survey records locked in a box, would not tell me what he had found. He said it was safer if I did not know." A bitter laugh escaped her. "As if that protected me. You still have the box. I have all his things. I could not bear to go through them." "Miss Preston, Eleanor, if those records prove what I think they prove, they could bring your father's killers to justice, and my brother's." She looked up at him, and even through the veil he could see the intensity in her eyes. "Where are they? I do not know yet. But someone powerful, someone with connections to the mining company and the land office, someone who has gotten away with murder twice that we know of." Eleanor stood abruptly and left the room. Owen heard her moving around in another part of the house. Then she returned with a wooden box about the size of a saddle bag. It was locked, but she produced a key from a chain around her neck and opened it with shaking hands. Inside were notebooks, maps, official documents with seals and signatures. Owen spread them on the table and began to read. What he found made him angry enough that he had to clench his fists to keep them steady. William Preston had documented everything. False surveys that pushed property lines to give mining access to land that should have been off limits. Forged signatures on claims. A systematic scheme to defraud both private landowners and the federal government, all orchestrated to benefit the Pacific Mining Company and a few corrupt officials. And there, on a list of people involved, was a name that made Owen's jaw tighten. Nathaniel Sutton, president of the Pacific Mining Company and one of the richest men in San Bernardino. This is it, Owen said. This is enough to hang them. Eleanor was reading over his shoulder, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her soap. Sutton, he came to my father's funeral, offered me money, said it was his Christian duty to help a poor orphaned girl. I threw him out. Good instincts. Owen looked up at her. But this makes you dangerous to him. If he even suspects you have these documents. Let him come, Eleanor said, and there was steel in her voice. I have been hiding for 3 years. I am tired of it. Owen found himself smiling despite the gravity of the situation. You have got courage, Miss Preston, but courage does not stop bullets. We need to be smart about this. Take the evidence to someone we can trust, someone outside Sutton's influence. Who? The sheriff works for Sutton. Half the town council is in his pocket. The federal marshal in Los Angeles. This involves federal land, so it is his jurisdiction. We take the documents to him, let him handle the arrests. Los Angeles is 80 miles from here. Then we have got an 80-mile ride ahead of us. Owen began carefully gathering the papers and putting them back in the box. Can you ride? I used to. Before. She touched her veil self-consciously. Then you still can. We leave at first light before anyone knows we are gone. Bring what you need for a few days on the road. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, and Owen could feel her weighing the risks, the fear, the possibility of finally getting justice for her father. Then she nodded. First light. Owen stood, the box tucked under his arm. I will keep this safe tonight, and Miss Preston, bolt your door. Do not open it for anyone but me. He saw himself out, his mind already planning the route to Los Angeles, the supplies they would need, the dangers they might face. Nathaniel Sutton had killed to protect his secrets. He would not hesitate to kill again. But Owen Carver had not survived 10 years on cattle drives and range wars by being careless. He would get Eleanor Preston to Los Angeles safely, and then he would watch Sutton hang. That night, Eleanor barely slept. She packed a small bag with practical clothes, a change of undergarments, her father's pistol that she had learned to shoot but had never used on anything living. She moved through the dark house, touching familiar objects, wondering if she would ever see them again. This had been her refuge for 3 years, her hiding place from the world's cruel gaze. Leaving it felt like stepping off a cliff into empty air. But Owen Carver's words had awakened something in her, something she thought had died with her father. Purpose. Anger. The burning need for justice that had sustained her through the first terrible months and then faded to gray resignation. She wanted Nathaniel Sutton to pay. She wanted him to know that William Preston's daughter had destroyed him. And there was something else, something she barely dared acknowledge. Owen had looked at her without revulsion, had spoken to her as an equal, had trusted her with dangerous truths. For the first time in 3 years, she felt seen. Not as a tragic figure or a cautionary tale, but as a person who mattered. The knock came just as the sky was lightening to pearl gray. Eleanor opened the door to find Owen leading 2 horses, both saddled and ready. He had a bedroll and saddlebags on his own mount, and he handed her a canteen. For the road, it gets hot between here and Los Angeles. Eleanor pulled on her gloves and took the canteen. I am ready. He helped her mount, his hands steady on her waist, and for a moment they were close enough that she could see the golden flecks in his gray-green eyes. Then he stepped back and swung onto his own horse with easy grace. They rode out of San Bernardino as the town was waking, past shuttered shops and houses with smoke beginning to curl from chimneys. No one saw them go. By the time the sun crested the mountains, they were miles away, following the dusty road west through the scrub and rocks of the high desert. Owen set a steady pace. not pushing the horses but not dawdling either. Eleanor found that riding came back to her, easily despite the years, her body remembering the rhythm and balance. The veil was awkward in the wind, and finally she unpinned it and tucked it into her bag. Owen glanced at her but said nothing, and she felt a rush of gratitude for his tact. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the bread and cheese Owen had brought. They sat in the shade of a rocky outcrop, and Eleanor drank deeply from her canteen. The heat was fierce, the sun beating down from a cloudless sky. "Tell me about your brother," Eleanor said. "What was he like?" Owen was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant horizon. "James was the responsible one. I was always getting into trouble, picking fights, chasing after wild schemes. He was the one who kept me grounded, made me think before I acted. When our parents died of fever, he raised me. I was only 12. He was 17. He smiled sadly. He deserved better than dying in a tunnel collapse that was not a collapse at all." "My father was like that," Eleanor said softly. "Steady, honest, he never lied, not even little polite lies. He said the truth mattered more than people's feelings. I used to think that was harsh. Now I understand it got him killed. Truth is dangerous to men like Sutton. So is living." Eleanor looked down at her gloved hands. "I have been so afraid for so long, Mr. Carver. Afraid of being seen, of being pitied, of facing the world with this." She gestured to her scarred face. "But riding out here, doing something that matters, I realize I have been dead these past 3 years, just a ghost haunting my father's house." Owen reached out and very gently touched her hand. "You are not a ghost, Eleanor. You are one of the bravest people I have ever met." She looked at him, searching his face for pity or lies, and found only sincerity. Something in her chest loosened, a knot of pain she had carried so long she had forgotten it was there. "We should keep moving," Owen said, standing and brushing dust from his pants. "Want to make good distance before nightfall." They rode through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing from desert scrub to rolling hills dotted with oak trees. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Owen led them off the main road to a small creek bordered by willows. "We will camp here tonight. Water for the horses and cover in case anyone comes looking." Eleanor had not thought about pursuit, but of course Sutton would notice when she disappeared. Would he connect it to the documents? Would he send men after them? As if reading her thoughts, Owen said, "I will take first watch. You should rest." He built a small fire and made coffee in a battered pot, and they ate more bread and some dried beef that was tough but filling. The stars came out in breathtaking profusion, more than Eleanor had ever seen from town. She spread her bedroll near the fire and lay down, exhausted but too keyed up to sleep. "Owen," she said into the darkness, "why are you helping me? You could take the documents to the marshal yourself. You do not need me." There was a long pause. Then his voice came from where he sat by the fire, keeping watch. "Because you deserve justice just as much as James does. And because the first time I saw you, pressed against that wall, trying so hard to be brave, I thought you were the most remarkable woman I had ever seen." Eleanor's breath caught. "You could not even see my face." "I did not need to, I saw you." She closed her eyes, his words wrapping around her like a blanket. For the first time in 3 years, she slept without nightmares. The next day they made good progress, covering nearly 30 miles before the heat forced them to stop. They were following the old Mission Road now, passing through small settlements and farms. At one tiny pueblo, they bought fresh tortillas and beans from a Mexican woman who smiled kindly at Eleanor and did not stare at her scars. "How much farther to Los Angeles?" Eleanor asked as they ate their meal in the shade of a mission church. "If we keep this pace, we should be there by tomorrow evening. The marshal's office is near the plaza. Owen wiped his hands on his bandana. Once we hand over the documents, Sutton will be arrested. He has got money for lawyers, but the evidence is solid. He will hang or spend the rest of his life in prison. Good. Eleanor's voice was hard. He took everything from me, my father, my face, my life. I want him to suffer. Owen looked at her with something like concern. Revenge does not heal wounds, Eleanor. I have seen what it does to people. I do not want revenge, I want justice. There is a difference. Is there? She met his eyes. Justice is about setting things right, making sure he cannot hurt anyone else. Revenge would be putting a bullet in him myself, which I have considered and decided against. Decided that watching him lose everything he values is better than a quick death. Owen smiled slightly. Remind me never to cross you, Miss Preston. They mounted up and continued west. The landscape was greener here, irrigated by the rivers that flowed down from the mountains. They passed orange groves and vineyards, sprawling ranches with white-faced cattle grazing behind fences. Eleanor found herself relaxing despite the danger, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her and the beauty of the land around her. They talked as they rode, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, the dreams they had given up and the ones they still harbored. Owen told her about the open plains of Wyoming, the vast herds of cattle, the bone-deep loneliness of the trail. Eleanor told him about her mother, who had died when Eleanor was 10, about learning to cook and sew and keep house for her father, about the books she had loved and the adventures she had imagined. I wanted to see the world, she said wistfully. Paris, London, New York. I read about them in novels and thought someday I would go. Then Mama died and Papa needed me, and then she trailed off. The world is still there, Owen said quietly, and you are only 23. There is time. Who would want to travel with a scarred woman in a veil? Owen reined his horse closer to hers so they were riding side by side, their legs almost touching. I would. Eleanor's heart stuttered. She looked at him, trying to read his expression, afraid to hope. You do not mean that. I have never been much for saying things I do not mean. He held her gaze. You are beautiful, Eleanor, and I am not talking about your face. Tears stung her eyes. You have not even seen it, not really. I have seen enough. I have seen your courage and your strength and your fierce desire for justice. I have seen the way you sit a horse like you were born to it, and the way you watch the sunset like it is a painting made just for you. That is what beauty is. The rest is just skin. Eleanor could not speak. No one had called her beautiful in 3 years. She had not even called herself beautiful in her own mind, had trained herself to think of her appearance only as something to hide, to be ashamed of. But Owen's words, spoken with such simple sincerity, cracked something open inside her. Thank you, she whispered. They rode in comfortable silence after that, but something had shifted between them, a new awareness that made Eleanor's skin tingle and her pulse race. She found herself watching Owen, noticing the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands rested easy on the reins, the quiet confidence in every movement. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, his features too rough-hewn for that, but there was something compelling about him, something solid and real. That night they camped in an oak grove, and Owen caught fish in a nearby stream for their dinner. They cooked the fish over the fire and ate with their fingers, the simple meal tasting better than any fancy restaurant food Eleanor remembered from before. The night was warm, and she left her veil off, sitting across the fire from Owen and letting him see her ruined face in the flickering light. He did not look away. He met her eyes and smiled, and she felt something inside her begin to heal. Tell me what happened, he said gently. If you want to. Eleanor had never told anyone the full story. The doctor who had treated her burns knew the basics, and the sheriff had taken her statement, but she had never spoken about that morning in detail. Now, with Owen listening, she found the words coming easier than she expected. I woke early. I always did, to start breakfast before Papa got up. I was heating the skillet for eggs when I heard the shot. The window broke and Papa made this sound, like all the air had gone out of him. I turned and saw him falling, and then there was another shot, and I knew whoever it was intended to make sure he was dead. I threw myself at Papa, trying to cover him to protect him, and my face hit the skillet. It was so hot it had just started to smoke. She paused, remembering the agony, the smell. Owen said nothing, just waited. I must have screamed. I remember the pain and then nothing. When I woke up, the doctor was there and Papa was dead. The burns got infected. I had fever for weeks. By the time I healed enough to think clearly, the trail was cold. The sheriff said it was probably a drifter, someone who saw an opportunity and took it. But I knew Papa had been worried about something, had been spending long hours going over his survey records. I knew it was connected. "And you were right," Owen said. "He died because he was honest, because he would not look the other way." "Sometimes I am so angry I can barely breathe," Eleanor confessed. Angry at Sutton, at the sheriff for not investigating properly, at God for letting it happen. Angry at myself for not saving him. You tried. You have the scars to prove it. They did not do any good. He died anyway. Owen leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Eleanor, listen to me. You were 20 years old and someone fired a gun through your window. You did not freeze or run. You tried to save your father at the cost of your own safety. That took more courage than most people have in their entire lives. You have nothing to be ashamed of. I am not ashamed of trying to save him. I am ashamed of hiding after, of giving up. You did not give up. You survived. And now you are riding to Los Angeles to make sure your father's murderer faces justice. That is not giving up. That is fighting back." Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks, hot against the scar tissue. "I am afraid," she whispered. "What if we fail? What if Sutton gets away with it?" Owen stood and came around the fire to sit beside her. He put his arm around her shoulders, careful and respectful, and she leaned into his warmth. "We will not fail. I promise you that." She wanted to believe him. Sitting there in his arms under a sky full of stars, she almost did. They reached the outskirts of Los Angeles late the next afternoon, dusty and tired but intact. The city was bigger than Eleanor had expected, sprawling and busy with traffic and noise. Owen led them through the streets to a modest hotel near the plaza, where he secured 2 rooms and arranged for the horses to be stabled. "Get cleaned up and rest," he told Eleanor. "I am going to find the marshal's office and set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. The documents will be safer in his hands than ours." Eleanor went to her room, small but clean, with a real bed and a wash basin. She scrubbed the trail dust from her skin and hair, put on the one decent dress she had brought, and pinned her veil back in place. Looking at herself in the small mirror, she saw a stranger. The journey had changed something in her expression, given her back some spark she had thought lost forever. There was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Owen, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes, looking more civilized than she had yet seen him. "The marshal will see us at 9 tomorrow morning," he said. "I told him we had evidence in a murder case. He seemed interested." "Thank you, Owen, for everything," he smiled. "Do not thank me yet. We still have to convince him to act on what we have got. But I think once he sees Preston's documentation, he will not have much choice." He hesitated. "There is a decent restaurant downstairs. Would you have dinner with me?" Eleanor's heart skipped. "I would like that." The restaurant was simple, but the food was good. Beef and potatoes and fresh bread with butter. They sat at a corner table, and Eleanor noticed that Owen positioned himself, so that her veiled face was turned away from the other diners, giving her privacy. The gesture touched her more than she could say. "What will you do after?" Owen asked. "After Sutton is arrested and the trial is over." Eleanor had not thought that far ahead. The future had been a blank wall for so long that planning for it seemed almost absurd. "I do not know. Go back to San Bernardino, I suppose. The house is still mine. You could sell it, start fresh somewhere new, maybe." She looked at him. "What about you? Will you go back to Wyoming?" "I do not think so. Wyoming was James's dream more than mine. I went there because he wanted to, and after he died I did not know what else to do." Owen turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I have been thinking maybe I would stay in California. It is a growing place, lots of opportunities for a man willing to work hard." "Where in California?" His eyes met hers. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether a certain brave, beautiful woman might want some company." Eleanor's breath caught. "Owen, you cannot mean that. You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are strong and honest, and you do not give up even when you have every reason to. I know that talking to you is easier than breathing, and that when I look at you I see someone I could spend my life with and never get bored." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few days. But Eleanor, I have spent 10 years drifting from place to place, never putting down roots, never finding anything worth staying for. And then I met you and everything changed." Eleanor was trembling. "I am damaged, Owen. My face." "To hell with your face," Owen said, his voice fierce. "I am not asking your face to marry me. I am asking you." The word hung in the air between them. Marry. It was absurd, impossible, too fast, too much. And yet Eleanor found herself gripping his hand like a lifeline, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts over it. "You are serious," she said wonderingly. "Completely. Although I will understand if you need time to think about it. I know I am not much of a catch. Just a former cowboy with some money saved and a stubborn streak." "You are the first person in 3 years to make me feel human," Eleanor said. "The first person to look at me and see me. Not my scars, not my tragedy, just me. So yes, Owen Carver. Yes, I will marry you." His face lit up with a joy so pure it made her want to cry. He raised her gloved hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You have just made me the happiest man in California." They sat there grinning at each other like fools until the waiter came to clear their plates, and even then they could not stop smiling. That night Eleanor lay in her hotel bed, too excited to sleep, replaying every word of their conversation. She was engaged. She was going to be married. It seemed like a dream, too good to be true, but Owen's solid presence in the room next door made it real. She thought about her father and wished desperately that he could have met Owen, could have seen her this happy. He would have liked Owen, she thought. Would have respected his honesty and his determination to see justice done. And he would have been glad that his daughter had found someone who loved her not despite her scars but including them, as part of the whole complex person she was. Tomorrow, they would give the documents to the marshal. Sutton would be arrested. Her father's murder would finally be avenged. And then she and Owen would build a new life together, something good rising from the ashes of tragedy. She fell asleep with a smile on her face. The marshal's office was a whitewashed adobe building near the plaza, and Marshal Raymond Gates was a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He listened to their story without interrupting, examined the documents with increasing interest, and finally sat back in his chair with a low whistle. "This is damning evidence," he said. "If even half of what Preston documented here is true, Sutton and his associates have defrauded the government of thousands of acres of land. That is a federal crime and the penalties are severe." "Can you arrest him?" Eleanor asked. I can and I will. But I want to do this right, which means getting warrants from a federal judge and coordinating with the local authorities in San Bernardino. Sutton is a powerful man with powerful friends. If we move too soon or without proper authorization, his lawyers will tear our case apart. Owen leaned forward. How long will that take? A few days, maybe a week. Gates looked at Eleanor. You will need to give a formal statement, Miss Preston, about your father's murder and the circumstances surrounding it, and you will likely be called to testify at the trial. Eleanor nodded. I will do whatever is necessary. Good. In the meantime, I suggest you stay in Los Angeles. Sutton does not know you are here yet, and I would like to keep it that way until we are ready to move. They left the marshal's office with a sense of accomplishment tempered by impatience. The wheels of justice were turning, but slowly. Still, it was more progress than Eleanor had made in 3 years, and she felt lighter than she had in ages. Owen took her hand as they walked through the plaza. We have a few days with nothing to do. What would you like to see? Eleanor thought about all the times she had hidden in her house, all the experiences she had denied herself out of fear and shame. Everything, she said, and so they explored Los Angeles together. They visited the old mission with its beautiful gardens and peaceful courtyards. They walked along the river and watched children playing in the shallows. They browsed the market stalls, where Owen bought Eleanor a beautiful shawl embroidered with flowers. They ate at tiny restaurants serving food from Mexico and China, and places Eleanor had only read about in books. And slowly, gradually, Eleanor found herself leaving her veil off more and more. At first just when they were alone, then in quiet places where few people would see, and finally, even in crowded streets. She noticed people staring, but Owen's steady presence beside her made it bearable. He did not flinch from her scars or try to hide her away. He walked proud with her hand on his arm as if she were the most beautiful woman in the city. One evening they sat by the river watching the sun set, and Eleanor said, I never thought I could be this happy again. Owen pulled her close. Get used to it. I plan to make you happy for the rest of your life. That is a long time. Not long enough. She turned to look at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had been afraid to speak. Owen, I need to tell you something. All right. When I look in the mirror, all I see are the scars. The twisted skin, the way my mouth does not quite close right, the eye that will not open all the way. I see ugliness and damage and loss. I cannot see what you see when you look at me. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Can I show you? He stood and drew her up with him, led her along the riverbank to where the water pooled clear and still as glass. The sun had set now, and the first stars were coming out, reflecting in the water's surface. Look, Owen said softly, positioning her so she could see her reflection. Eleanor looked down and saw herself as if for the first time. Yes, the scars were there, livid in the fading light. But she also saw the curve of her cheek on the unmarred side, the dark fall of her hair, the way her eyes shone with something that looked almost like joy. And beside her reflection was Owen's, his face gentle and full of love. I see a survivor, Owen said, his voice low and intimate. I see someone who faced the worst thing that could happen and did not break. I see strength and courage and a heart big enough to still believe in justice and hope. That is what I see, Eleanor. That is who you are. Eleanor felt tears sliding down her face, but they were not tears of grief anymore. They were something else, something cleaner. Catharsis, maybe, or healing. I want to believe you, she whispered. Then believe me. Owen turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Eleanor Preston, you are beautiful, every part of you, and I am going to spend the rest of our lives proving it to you. And then he kissed her. It was Eleanor's first kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and nothing like she expected. It was gentle and fierce all at once, tender and passionate, and it made her feel like she was glowing from the inside out. She kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding in for 3 years, all the loneliness and pain and desperate hope, and when they finally broke apart they were both breathless. "Wow," Eleanor said inadequately. Owen laughed, a deep, warm sound that made her smile. "Yeah, wow." They stood there by the river with their arms around each other until the stars came out in full force, and Eleanor thought that if this was happiness, she wanted to hold on to it forever. 6 days later, Marshal Gates came to their hotel with news. "We have got the warrants. Federal judge signed them this morning. I am riding to San Bernardino tomorrow with a deputy marshal and 2 local lawmen I trust. We will arrest Sutton and anyone else involved in the scheme." "Can we come with you?" Owen asked. Gates frowned. "It could be dangerous. Sutton might not go quietly." "I want to be there," Eleanor said firmly. "I want him to see that I am the one who brought him down." The marshal studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you stay back when we make the arrest. I will not have civilians getting shot." They left for San Bernardino at dawn, a grim-faced group riding with purpose. Eleanor felt her anxiety building as they got closer to home, the familiar landscape bringing back memories both good and terrible. But Owen rode beside her, steady as always, and that made all the difference. They reached San Bernardino in the late afternoon and went straight to Sutton's grand house on the hill overlooking town. It was a massive structure of stone and timber, built to impress and intimidate. Marshal Gates hammered on the door with authority. A butler answered, looking down his nose at the dusty travelers. "Mr. Sutton is not receiving visitors." Gates held up his badge. "Federal Marshal Raymond Gates. I have a warrant for Nathaniel Sutton's arrest. Bring him out or I am coming in." The butler's superior expression faltered. He disappeared inside, and a moment later Nathaniel Sutton himself appeared. He was a large man, expensively dressed, with the kind of face that was used to getting its own way. His eyes swept over the group and stopped on Eleanor. "Miss Preston," he said smoothly. "What a surprise to see you out and about, and with such interesting company." "Nathaniel Sutton," Gates said formally, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States government, falsification of land records, and suspicion of murder. You have the right to." "Murder?" Sutton's face darkened. "That is absurd. I have never killed anyone." "Maybe not personally," Owen said, his voice hard, "but you gave the order. William Preston and James Carver both died because they knew too much about your schemes." Sutton's eyes narrowed. "I do not know what you are talking about, and I certainly will not stand here and be accused by some cowboy and a scarred woman who has clearly lost her mind with grief." Eleanor stepped forward, pulling off her veil with deliberate slowness. "I have not lost my mind, Mr. Sutton. I have found my courage. My father documented everything you did. Every false survey, every forged signature, every acre of land you stole. And now the federal marshal has all of it." For the first time, Sutton looked uncertain. William Preston was a fool who did not understand how business works in the modern world. "He understood corruption when he saw it," Eleanor said. "And he was going to expose you, so you had him killed. And when your men shot him through our kitchen window, I tried to save him and got this." She gestured to her scarred face. "Every time I look in a mirror, I see what you did to my family, and now everyone else will see what you really are." Sutton's face went red with rage. He lunged toward Eleanor, but Owen moved faster, putting himself between them with his hand on his gun. The marshal's deputies drew their weapons and Sutton froze. "That is enough," Gates said. "Nathaniel Sutton, you are coming with us. Deputy, cuff him." As they led Sutton away in chains, he turned back to Eleanor with venom in his eyes. "You will regret this. I have powerful friends." I will be out in a week, and when I am, you will wish you had stayed hidden." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Threaten me all you want. You have already taken everything you can from me, and I am not afraid anymore." She watched them load Sutton into a wagon for transport to the federal jail in Los Angeles. Other arrests were being made around town, corrupt officials and Sutton's co-conspirators, all swept up in the net that William Preston's careful documentation had woven. Sheriff Thomas was among those arrested, which explained why he had never seriously investigated her father's murder. Eleanor felt a savage satisfaction watching him led away in handcuffs, protesting his innocence to anyone who would listen. As the last wagon pulled away, Owen put his arm around Eleanor. "You did it. You got justice for your father." Eleanor leaned into him, suddenly exhausted. "We did it. I could not have done this without you." "Partners," Owen said with a smile. "Partners," Eleanor agreed. "And soon to be husband and wife." They walked back through town together, and Eleanor noticed people staring. But the stares were different now. There was respect in them and curiosity, and for some people even admiration. Word had already spread about what she had done, how she had brought down the most powerful man in San Bernardino. One of her old school friends, Martha Chen, approached hesitantly. "Eleanor, is it really you?" Eleanor stopped, tensing for the pity she usually saw in old acquaintances' eyes. But Martha was smiling. "I heard what you did, standing up to Sutton like that. That was incredibly brave. Thank you, Martha. And I wanted to apologize. After your father died, after you were hurt, I should have come to see you. I should have helped. But I did not know what to say, and then time passed and it seemed too late, and I am sorry. I was a coward." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "You are here now. That is what matters." Martha hugged her, careful and genuine, and Eleanor hugged her back. It was the first time in 3 years that someone other than Owen had embraced her, and it felt like another piece of her broken life clicking back into place. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor and Owen settled into a new routine. The trial was scheduled for August, and they were both subpoenaed as witnesses. In the meantime, they made plans for their future. Owen found work with a freight company, using his knowledge of horses and routes to good effect. Eleanor reopened her father's house, but this time she did not hide in it. She started taking in sewing work again, and was surprised when several of the town's ladies came to her personally to place orders. They were curious about her, about the woman who had taken down Nathaniel Sutton, and most of them were kind. Not everyone, of course. There were still those who stared at her scars with revulsion, who whispered that she should keep herself covered, that her appearance was frightening to children. But Eleanor found that their opinions mattered less and less. She had Owen, who loved her unreservedly, and she had her own hard-won self-respect. That was enough. In July, they were married in a simple ceremony at the mission church. Eleanor wore a cream-colored dress that Martha helped her make, and she walked down the aisle with her face bare, her scars visible to everyone. "Let them look," she thought. "This is who I am." Owen waited for her at the altar, and when he saw her, his face lit up with such joy that she forgot to be self-conscious. The priest pronounced them husband and wife, and Owen kissed her in front of God and the whole congregation, and Eleanor felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They had a small reception in the church garden, nothing fancy but filled with good food and good people. Martha was there, and several other friends who had come back into Eleanor's life after the arrests. Even some of Owen's cowboy friends had ridden in from Wyoming to celebrate, rough men who treated Eleanor with gruff courtesy and got drunk on punch. As the sun set and the party wound down, Owen pulled Eleanor aside to a quiet corner of the garden. "Happy, Mrs. Carver?" "Deliriously," Eleanor said, and kissed him. They spent their wedding night in the hotel in Los Angeles, the same one where Owen had first proposed. It was awkward and sweet, and everything a wedding night should be. And Eleanor woke the next morning in Owen's arms feeling more content than she had ever imagined possible. The trial began the first week of August. It was held in Los Angeles to ensure impartiality, and the courtroom was packed with spectators and reporters. The evidence William Preston had gathered was presented piece by piece, building an overwhelming case against Sutton and his co-conspirators. Eleanor testified for an entire day, walking the jury through her father's investigation, the morning he was killed, the aftermath. She did not cry, though it was hard. She spoke clearly and calmly, making sure everyone understood exactly what Sutton had done. When Sutton's lawyer tried to discredit her testimony by implying her scars had affected her mind, Eleanor stood up in the witness box and said, "My face was burned, sir, not my brain. I know exactly what I saw and heard, and no amount of insinuation will change the facts." The courtroom erupted in applause, and the judge had to bang his gavel for order. Sutton's lawyer sat down, deflated. Owen testified next, connecting James Carver's death to the same conspiracy. Other witnesses followed, miners and surveyors and clerks who had known something was wrong but had been too afraid to speak up. The weight of evidence was crushing. The trial lasted 3 weeks. In the end, the jury took less than 2 hours to find Nathaniel Sutton guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence given his age. His co-conspirators received similar terms. As Sutton was led away in chains, he looked at Eleanor one last time. Whatever he saw in her face made him look away first, defeated. Eleanor and Owen left the courthouse hand in hand, facing a barrage of reporters shouting questions. Eleanor paused on the steps and made a brief statement. "My father, William Preston, was an honest man who died for telling the truth. Today justice was served, not just for him but for everyone else Nathaniel Sutton deceived and defrauded. I hope this sends a message that no one is above the law, no matter how rich or powerful they think they are." The reporters loved it. Eleanor's face appeared in newspapers across California, and she received letters from as far away as New York praising her courage. It was strange and overwhelming, but Owen helped her navigate it all with his steady presence and dry humor. They returned to San Bernardino as minor celebrities, which was uncomfortable at first. But gradually the attention faded, and they were able to build a normal life. Owen bought a small ranch outside of town, 20 acres with a creek running through it. They built a house together, nothing fancy but solid and comfortable, with big windows that let in the light. Eleanor started a dressmaking business that did surprisingly well. Women came from all over the county to order from her, partly because of her skill with a needle and partly because they wanted to meet the woman who had brought down Sutton. Eleanor did not mind being a curiosity as long as they paid their bills. Owen raised horses, using his knowledge from years of cowboy work to breed strong, reliable animals. He had a gift for training even the most difficult horses, and his reputation spread. Within a year, they had more business than they could handle. They were happy. It was a quiet happiness, built on hard work and mutual respect and genuine love. Eleanor still had nightmares sometimes, dreams where she was back in that kitchen watching her father die. But Owen was always there when she woke, holding her and reminding her that she was safe, that the monsters had been locked away. 2 years after they married, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, afraid that she would somehow pass on her scars or her trauma to the baby. But Owen was thrilled, and his enthusiasm was infectious. Their son was born in the spring of 1887, a healthy baby boy with Owen's gray-green eyes and a loud cry that could wake the neighbors. They named him William, after Eleanor's father, and James for his middle name after Owen's brother. Holding her son for the first time, Eleanor wept with gratitude. She had thought her life was over that terrible morning when her face met the skillet and her father's blood soaked into the floor. She had believed herself broken beyond repair, condemned to a half-life of hiding and shame. But she had been wrong. With Owen's love and her own hard-won courage, she had built something beautiful from the ashes. She had found justice, found love, found herself again. Little William grew quickly, a bright, curious child who seemed to inherit the best qualities of both his parents. When he was 2, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Clara Marie. Clara had Eleanor's dark hair and delicate features, and from the start she was fearless, climbing everything in sight and laughing at danger. The children never seemed bothered by Eleanor's scars. To them, she was just Mama, the one who sang lullabies and told stories and kissed scraped knees. When William was old enough to ask about her face, Eleanor told him a simplified version of the truth, and he said, "So you tried to save Grandpa William. That was brave, Mama." Owen's eyes had met hers over their son's head, warm with love and pride, and Eleanor felt her heart swell almost painfully. The ranch prospered. They added more land, built a bigger barn, hired hands to help with the horses. Eleanor's dress shop grew too, and she took on 2 apprentices to help with the workload. They became pillars of the community, respected and liked. Eleanor never forgot her father or the price he had paid for his honesty. Every year on the anniversary of his death, she and Owen visited his grave and left fresh flowers. She told her children stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew what kind of man he had been. And every year, she and Owen made a donation to the San Bernardino School in William Preston's name, funding books and supplies for children who could not afford them. It was a small thing, but it felt important. Her father had believed in truth and education, in giving people the tools to make informed decisions. This was a way to honor that legacy. When William Preston Carver turned 5, he started asking questions about his grandfather's death in more detail. Eleanor decided he was old enough for the truth, or at least most of it. She sat him down and told him about Nathaniel Sutton, about the corruption and the murders, about how his grandfather had died trying to do the right thing. "Was the bad man punished?" William asked, his young face serious. "Yes, sweetheart. He is in prison and will be for the rest of his life. Because of you and Papa, because your grandfather left evidence, and Papa and I made sure it got to the right people. But mostly because your grandfather was brave enough to stand up for what was right, even though it was dangerous." William thought about this. "I want to be like Grandpa William." Eleanor pulled him close, blinking back tears. "Then be honest and brave and kind. That is what he would have wanted." Owen had been listening from the doorway, and when William ran off to play, he came and wrapped his arms around Eleanor. "You are raising him right." "We are raising him right," Eleanor corrected. Life continued its gentle rhythm. The children grew. The ranch flourished. Eleanor and Owen grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their struggles, of course. Money was sometimes tight, and there were dry years when the creek ran low and they worried about water for the horses. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. In 1893, when Eleanor was 32 and Owen 35, they added a 3rd child to their family, another boy they named Thomas Owen. Tommy was a sweet-natured baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world with solemn eyes. Eleanor sometimes marveled at the fullness of her life, at the family she had built with Owen. There had been a time when she thought she would die alone and unloved, when the scars on her face seemed like a wall between her and any possible happiness. But Owen had seen past the scars to the woman beneath, and in doing so had given her the courage to see herself clearly too. She still wore a veil sometimes, on trips to Los Angeles or when meeting new people who might be startled by her appearance. But mostly she went bare-faced, and if people stared, she stared right back. She was Eleanor Carver, wife and mother and business owner, survivor and fighter. Her scars were part of her story, but they did not define her. One evening in the summer of 1894, Eleanor and Owen sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were asleep inside, worn out from a day of playing in the creek. The air was warm and still, heavy with the scent of honeysuckle from the vine Eleanor had planted beside the porch. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Owen asked suddenly. Eleanor looked at him. "What do you mean, if I had not been in San Bernardino that day? If I had ridden past that general store without stopping, if I had not been looking for answers about James's death?" "I think about it sometimes," Eleanor admitted, "but I do not dwell on it. You were there. You did stop, and everything that happened after brought us here. No regrets." "Not a single one." Eleanor reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You gave me my life back, Owen. You made me believe I was worth loving. I could never regret that." Owen raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting. A home. A family. I am the one who should be grateful." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. After a while, Eleanor said, "Do you remember what you said to me that night by the river in Los Angeles, when you showed me my reflection in the water?" "I remember." "You said you saw a survivor, someone who did not break." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "I did not believe you then, not really. I thought you were being kind, seeing what you wanted to see instead of what was really there. And now I think you were right. I am strong. I did survive. And these scars are proof of that, not something to hide or be ashamed of. They are proof that I loved my father enough to try to save him, that I was brave even when I was terrified. You taught me to see that, Owen, and I will love you forever for it." Owen's eyes were suspiciously bright. "You are going to make me cry, woman." "Good. You have made me cry enough times. It is your turn." He laughed and pulled her into his arms, and they sat there together as the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The years passed peacefully. William grew into a thoughtful young man who wanted to be a surveyor like his grandfather. He apprenticed with a firm in Los Angeles and showed real aptitude for the work. Clara became a teacher, fierce and passionate about education, the way her grandfather had been about truth. Tommy took to ranching naturally, learning everything Owen could teach him about horses and land management. Eleanor and Owen grew older, their hair going gray, their faces weathering with time and sun. But they were still deeply in love, still the first person the other looked for in any room. They held hands walking through town and stole kisses when they thought the children were not looking. Their children found it embarrassing and wonderful in equal measure. In 1905, William Preston Carver married a lovely young woman named Sarah Mitchell, and they settled in Los Angeles, where William had a good position with a surveying firm. A year later, they made Eleanor and Owen grandparents with the birth of twin girls, Emma and Elizabeth. Eleanor held the babies and marveled at how far she had come from the broken young woman who had thought her life was over. These beautiful children existed because she had been brave enough to seek justice, because she had met Owen on a dusty street in San Bernardino, because she had learned to see herself as worthy of love. Clara married a fellow teacher in 1907, a kind man named David Foster who appreciated her sharp mind and sharper tongue. They remained in San Bernardino, living close enough that Eleanor saw them often. Their children, 2 boys, were holy terrors who kept everyone entertained. Tommy took over the main running of the ranch as Owen's knees started to give him trouble. He had a good head for business and expanded their operations, breeding some of the finest horses in Southern California. He married late, at 30, to a widow with 3 children of her own, and the blended family filled the ranch house with noise and laughter. Eleanor eventually retired from dressmaking, passing the business on to one of her former apprentices. She spent her time gardening and reading and spoiling her grandchildren. Owen spent his days on the porch in a comfortable chair, watching the horses in the pasture and telling stories to anyone who would listen. They grew old together, exactly as Owen had promised that night by the river. There were aches and pains, the inevitable diminishments of age, but they faced them together with the same partnership that had sustained them through everything else. In the spring of 1918, Eleanor and Owen celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary with a big party. All their children and grandchildren came, plus friends from town and hands from the ranch. It was a joyous occasion, full of food and music and love. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Eleanor and Owen found themselves alone on the porch again, the place where they had shared so many quiet evenings over the years. 31 years, Eleanor said wonderingly. Where did the time go into all of this? Owen gestured to the house, the land, the lingering traces of family everywhere. Into a life well lived. Eleanor leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. She was 67 now, her hair completely white, her body bent with arthritis. But she felt young in her heart, full of love and gratitude for everything she had been given. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For lifting my veil that day, for seeing me when I could not see myself, for giving me this beautiful life." Owen turned and cupped her face gently in his hands, his touch as tender as it had been the first time he kissed her. The scars were still there, faded with time but permanent. He traced them with his thumb, his expression full of love. "I will always see you, Eleanor, always." And he kissed her as the sun set over the mountains. 2 old people who had loved each other through everything life could throw at them, and would love each other still until their last breaths and beyond. They had many more good years together. Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925, at the age of 67, with Eleanor holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, but without bitterness. They had been blessed with 37 years of marriage, 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and a love that had sustained them through joy and sorrow alike. Eleanor lived another 8 years, surrounded by family, still sharp-minded and spirited until the end. She died in 1933 at the age of 72 in the ranch house she and Owen had built together, with her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed. Her last words were, "Tell Owen I am coming. Tell him I see him." They buried her next to Owen in the San Bernardino cemetery, not far from her father's grave. The headstone read, "Eleanor Preston Carver, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was seen, she was loved, she was brave." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each new owner adding to the legacy Eleanor and Owen had started. The story of how they met, how Eleanor had brought down Nathaniel Sutton, how Owen had loved her fearlessly and completely, became family legend, passed down to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And in San Bernardino, in the elementary school that bore William Preston's name, there hung a photograph of Eleanor Carver. She was not wearing a veil in the picture. Her scarred face was clearly visible, but so was her smile, warm and genuine and full of life. Beneath the photograph was a plaque that read, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to do what is right despite it." Children pass that photograph every day, learning without knowing it that beauty comes in many forms, that scars tell stories of survival, and that love sees far deeper than skin. Eleanor and Owen's love story became a testament to the truth that we are all more than our wounds, more than our tragedies, more than the worst things that have ever happened to us. We are also our courage, our resilience, our capacity to love and be loved. The gunshot that killed William Preston and burned Eleanor's face had been meant to silence truth and destroy a life. Instead, it had set in motion a chain of events that brought justice to the wicked, love to the lonely, and hope to everyone who heard the story of the veiled woman and the cowboy who saw past her scars to the beautiful soul within. And in the end, that was a legacy worth far more than any amount of gold or land. It was a legacy of love, and it endured long after Eleanor and Owen had gone to their rest, together at last in a place where scars do not exist, and all faces shine with the light of truth and love eternal.